We are going to speak with John Hanna, joining us from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. He's a senior counsel. He served as Vice President Cheney's National Security Advisor and a senior advisor to Secretary of State Warren Christopher during the Clinton administration. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Arlene.
All right, where do you lie in all this? I mean, you've got the two extremes and you've got the middle. We all know sometimes the extremes are right.
Yeah, they can be, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to be pessimistic today. I think I'm a lot closer to the Prime Minister of Israel than I am to my own president today, unfortunately. I see dark days ahead, maybe not this year, maybe not even next year, but a few years from now, I think Iran is going to pose tremendous problems for the next president.
All right. What exactly is Iran perhaps cheering about here as we talk about, as you say, the pessimistic point of view? I mean, the president is trying to build up and saying, they have stopped certain ways that they can progress with the nuclear deal, and many people feel that they're just being sold something. John, what is your biggest fear here?
Well, if you just step back and looked at what were the goals of each side in this negotiation, Iran's goal was to maintain an option to build a nuclear weapons arsenal at some point and to get all international sanctions lifted. The U.S. goal, of course, was to eliminate any possibility of Iran being able to develop nuclear weapons. By any measure, looking at the contents of this agreement, Iran has won that bargain. Iran, at best, if every provision of this deal is obeyed, in 10 to 15 years, all of the important nuclear restrictions come off of Iran, and it will be able to build a massive industrial-sized nuclear program virtually without limit. They will be the proverbial screw drivers turn away from a nuclear arsenal. And in the meantime, during that period of time, and actually quite quickly, virtually all of the international community's sanctions leverage on Iran will disappear, strengthening the Iranian economy, putting hundreds of billions of dollars potentially into the hands of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard that is already on a rampage of aggression and terrorism across much of the Middle East. And I think it will set the clock ticking to some of our allies in the Gulf,
like Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia is beginning to think that, okay, all of the constraints on Iran are off. It is going to have a nuclear weapon at some point over the next decade with the legitimacy of the international community. We've got to start matching them centrifuge for centrifuge and building our own capability. And then, of course, you've got a nuclearized Middle East on a hair trigger in what is still the largest petroleum-producing region of the world.
Is this a microcosm of the two different points of views and how things should move forward in the Middle East here? You've got people hailing it as a tremendous achievement, and you have many people like yourself saying, hang on a minute here. I mean, this is maybe a legacy for this president, but this is a nuclear deal that has really opened the floodgates.
Yeah, I think we're going to now have a big and hopefully a great debate in this country, if not in the broader international community, about what exactly we've got ourselves here. What are we buying with this deal? I think the president is hoping that, and with some justification, he's buying himself maybe 10 to 15 years of time. And time is important in diplomacy, but at what price? My view, it's not only a price that appears to, at the end of it, pave the way for an Iranian to be a nuclear weapons threshold state, but it also threatens to supercharge Iranian terrorism in the region through tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in new revenues, and to trigger a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. And to my mind, this is a gamble just not worth it.
We get into motivation here, and there's been lots of talk about this president perhaps being a little lame at this time, but using his power to set down a lot of legacy. Do you have any speculation, John Hanna, as we talk about this Iranian deal, why this president would have been so strong on it?
I think the president believes in it. I think he believes that he's been a transformative figure, that he will be able to do in our relations with Iran that no other president has been able to do in 36 years, that this is his Nixon in China moment to really transform the international system, and not to mention, of course, again, in his mind, create a great foreign policy legacy that history will remember him by. His own advisors have said this is for him in the second term, the foreign policy equivalent of what Obamacare was in the first term. It's big stakes for the president. He believes it, and he's going for it.
You know, as you say, this is going to create, in your opinion, a big problem for the next president. What are the candidates thinking right now?
Well, I think initially out of the box, we've seen almost all of the first-tier Republican candidates come out with enormous skepticism about the deal, saying that it is, in effect, a bad deal. I think Governor Bush even said it was not diplomacy, it really is appeasement. Governor Walker has said he would abrogate the deal more or less on his first day in office. I think you're going to find a lot of unanimity amongst Republican candidates saying that this is a bad deal, and Congress probably needs to act now to disapprove it.
What are Americans thinking? I know that there were some early polls where they were very skeptical of this.
I think if there's any country in the world that Americans worry can't be trusted and has ill will toward the United States, it's Iran. Iran really rates at the top of that most hated list for Americans. On the other hand, I think Americans are conflicted because God knows they've seen more than 10 years of war and war in the Middle East. They think this is an investment that really hasn't paid much back for us, and if there was a way to walk away from this and to have some of the local parties kind of step up and act right, I think Americans will be tempted by it, and I think that's what the president is offering to them. I think it's an illusion myself, but I understand why Americans might be tempted to try and test this.
Because it makes some things that they want to go away at least seem to go away.
Of course, Americans are not active to be involved in this very most ungrateful of all regions, the Middle East, where nothing ever gets solved and there are only problems to deal with. And if there's a way that you can have this great deal with Iran, and Iran will become more or less a normal power, willing to cooperate with the United States in fighting terrorism, that'll be tempting to Americans.
What about the reaction so far of Hillary Clinton? She's found herself on the fence, having to dance on a lot of issues as she tries to appeal to the base with some numbers falling. What are Hillary's problems on this deal?
Well, first of all, of course, she was part of an administration that began these negotiations. It was her lieutenants who actually completed the deal. And as you say, the Democratic Party is clearly in a leftward trajectory. The base is actually moving away from her and her husband, who have been a more centrist wing in the party. And at the end of the day, she knows that she's going to need this president to get out on the stump and campaign for her and validate her. So going up against this president, opposing him on such an important issue to his legacy, she obviously has decided that that is not in the cards.
All right. And this is a division, as I was talking about, maybe it's a microcosm of some of the ways of thinking. Is America in this presidential election at this kind of a crossroads?
I think this is a very, very big issue. It will be a big issue in the campaign. It will hopefully be a great debate here in the United States over the next 60 days. America has got to decide where the threats are and what is our role in this world, and how are we going to manage countries like Iran that just a few days ago, again, held its annual march chanting death to America, death to Israel, with the president of Iran, the supposed moderate, at the very head of the parade.
Unbelievable. It is truly unbelievable. And Vladimir Putin praising this deal finally.
No doubt. He, of course, one part of this deal was the last-minute demand by Iran that we actually not only lift all nuclear-related sanctions, but we lift the United Nations arms embargo on conventional weapons to Iran, the number one state sponsor of terrorism, and you know who's going to be supplying those weapons. It's Russian companies. Putin smells money here. He smells an opportunity to really stick it to the United States and the American people, and he's going to take advantage of it.
Absolutely. It was wonderful to have you, John Hanna. Thank you so much for being here.
It was a great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right. You have a great day. All right. You have a great